James stood in my dorm doorway, holding flowers, and my heart jumped the way it used to when we first started dating. 2 months apart felt like forever. I threw my arms around him, breathing in his cologne, feeling like the luckiest woman alive. He kissed my forehead and said he couldn't stay away another day. I believed him completely. I had no reason not to. After all, we'd been married for 3 years, and I trusted him with everything I had. "Anne," I called out, practically dragging James inside. "Come meet my husband." My roommate appeared from her room, and I watched her face light up. She was 22, 4 years younger than me, with long dark hair and the kind of smile that made everyone comfortable. "James, this is Anne. Anne, this is James." They shook hands, and something flickered in Anne's expression that I couldn't quite read. She held his hand a second too long, but I pushed the thought away immediately. Anne offered to make coffee, and we all sat in our tiny living room talking. I told James about my classes, my professors, how close I was to finishing my master's degree. Anne laughed at all his jokes, leaned forward when he spoke, tucked her hair behind her ear 3 times in 10 minutes. I noticed these things but told myself I was being paranoid. I'd spent weeks telling Anne stories about James. Of course, she was interested. That's what roommates did. They cared about each other's lives. "We should all go out for dinner," James suggested suddenly. "My treat. Nicole's been working so hard and I want to celebrate her." Anne's eyes brightened. "That sounds amazing," she said quickly. Too quickly. I looked between them and felt something shift in the air, something I couldn't name, but James was smiling at me with so much warmth that I decided I was overthinking everything. My husband had flown all the way to Michigan to surprise me. Why was I inventing problems that didn't exist? At the restaurant, James sat across from me with Anne beside him. I didn't think anything of it at first. But throughout dinner, I noticed his attention kept drifting to her. He asked about her major, her family, her plans after graduation. He laughed loudest at her stories. When she reached for the breadbasket, his hand was already there. Their fingers touched. He didn't pull away as fast as he should have. I told myself I was imagining things. Marriage meant trust. I had to trust him. "I'll be right back," I said, excusing myself to the restroom. As I walked away, I glanced back once. James was leaning closer to Anne, saying something that made her smile wide. My stomach twisted. But what could I do? Accuse my husband of flirting in front of my roommate? That seemed crazy. I was stressed from school. I was tired. I was seeing things that weren't there. I washed my hands and stared at my reflection, telling myself to stop being paranoid. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that in those 5 minutes I was gone. James asked Anne for her phone number. She gave it to him. They saved each other's contacts while I stood in the bathroom convincing myself I was a bad wife for doubting him. When I returned to the table, they were both scrolling through their phones. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Perfect," James said, slipping his phone into his pocket. Anne smiled at me like nothing had happened, and I smiled back. After dinner, we drove to the airport together. James had a flight back home in 2 hours. He held my hand the entire drive and told me how proud he was of me. "You're doing something incredible, Nicole," he said. "I know it's hard being apart, but it'll all be worth it." I leaned against his shoulder, feeling guilty for doubting him earlier. This was the man I married, the man who supported my dreams even when it meant living in different states. How could I have questioned him? At the airport, he kissed me goodbye, long, slow, like he didn't want to leave. "I love you," he whispered. "I love you too," I said, meaning it with everything I had. I watched him walk through security, turning back twice to wave. I waved until I couldn't see him anymore. Then I drove back to the dorm alone, already missing him, already counting the weeks until I'd see him again. I had no idea that would be the last normal goodbye we'd ever share. The next morning, Anne was packing a suitcase when I woke up. "What's going on?" I asked, rubbing sleep from my eyes. "I have to go home," she said without looking at me. "My mom called last night, family emergency. I'm catching a flight in 3 hours." She moved quickly, stuffing clothes into her bag with shaking hands. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "It will be," she said. "I just need to be there." I hugged her and told her to be safe. She hugged me back, and I never suspected a thing. After Anne left, the dorm felt too quiet. I made coffee and sat down to study, but my mind kept wandering. Something felt off, though I couldn't explain what. I decided to clean to distract myself. That's when I found it. A black plastic card sitting on the edge of Anne's desk. I picked it up and recognized it immediately. James's company pass. The one he needed to get into his office building. He must have dropped it during his visit. I smiled, imagining how panicked he'd be when he realized it was missing. I could have just mailed the card back. That would have been the logical thing to do. But a wild idea hit me. What if I surprised him the same way he surprised me? I could fly home, drop off the card, spend the weekend with him and Banny, my golden retriever, who I missed desperately. Classes were slow this week. I could afford to miss 2 days. Before I could overthink it, I booked a ticket for the next afternoon. I didn't call James. I wanted it to be a surprise. The flight felt longer than usual. I kept imagining James's face when he opened the door and saw me standing there. I thought about how we'd laugh about the timing, how he'd come to Michigan, and then I'd fly home right after. I thought about sleeping in my own bed, playing with Banny, cooking dinner in my kitchen. I missed my house. I missed my life. I missed feeling like a wife instead of a graduate student living in a cramped dorm 500 miles away. I landed at 3 in the afternoon. The Uber driver talked the entire ride home, but I barely heard him. My heart was beating fast with excitement. I paid him, grabbed my overnight bag, and walked up to my front door. Our house, the beautiful 2-story home my father bought for us as a wedding gift. I slid my key into the lock as quietly as possible. I wanted to surprise James completely. I stepped inside and closed the door softly behind me. The house was silent. Too silent. Banny wasn't barking. That was the first strange thing. My dog always barked when someone came home. I set my bag down and listened. Nothing. Then I heard it, a sound from upstairs. A soft thump, footsteps. My heart started racing, but not with excitement anymore, with something else. Something cold. I walked toward the stairs slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. My hands were shaking. I told myself James was probably just taking a nap. That's why Banny wasn't barking. Everything was fine. Everything had to be fine. I climbed the stairs without making a sound. Our bedroom door was closed. I reached for the handle and turned it slowly. The door swung open, and everything inside me shattered. James was in our bed. Anne was in our bed. They were naked, tangled in sheets I had washed before leaving for school. In the bed I had slept in for 3 years. In the house my father had bought me. They didn't see me at first. They were too lost in each other, too busy destroying my entire world. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't say a single word. I stood there frozen for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then Anne turned her head. Her eyes met mine. Her face went completely white. "Nicole," she started, her voice breaking, but I was already backing out of the room. James sat up, scrambling for the blanket, shouting my name. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. If I stopped, I'd fall apart, and I refused to fall apart in front of them. I ran down the stairs, my vision blurry with tears I refused to let fall. "Nicole, wait, let me explain." James was behind me, probably pulling on clothes, chasing me, but I was faster. I grabbed Banny's leash from the hook by the door. My dog appeared instantly, tail wagging, so happy to see me. I clipped the leash to his collar, grabbed my bag, and walked straight out the door. James was still shouting from inside. I didn't look back. Not once. I got in my car, put Banny in the passenger seat, and drove. I ended up at my father's house. He lived 20 minutes away in the estate district where every house looked like a magazine cover. I pulled into his driveway, turned off the car, and finally let myself break. Sobs tore through me so hard I couldn't breathe. Banny whined and licked my face, trying to comfort me. My father must have heard me from inside because suddenly the car door opened and he was there. "Nicole, what happened?" I couldn't speak. I just fell into his arms and cried like I was 6 years old again. Inside his house, I told him everything. The surprise visit, the dinner, Anne leaving suddenly, finding the pass card, flying home, walking into my bedroom. My father's face changed as I spoke. His jaw tightened, his hands curled into fists. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Making a call," he said simply. He's the CEO of K-Bill Global Oil and Gas, the same company where James worked as a project manager. My stomach dropped. "Dad," He worked for my company, my father said, his voice cold and controlled. If he lived in a house I bought, he betrayed my daughter in a home I paid for. There are consequences for that. He made the call. I heard him speak to someone in HR. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. When he hung up, he looked at me. James has been terminated effective immediately. Security is escorting him out of the building right now. He has until tomorrow morning to remove his belongings from your house. I should have felt something. Guilt, maybe? Regret. But all I felt was numb. My father made more calls, to his lawyer, to his assistant, to someone who could change the locks on my house by tonight. Everything happened so fast it didn't feel real. James called my phone 7 times. I didn't answer. Anne sent me 12 text messages. I deleted every single one without reading them. My father made tea and sat with me in silence while Banny slept at my feet. You didn't deserve this, he finally said. I nodded. But I still felt like I'd missed something obvious. By the next morning, James's things were gone from the house. The locks were changed. Anne had packed her belongings from the dorm and dropped out of school. Someone told me she went back to her hometown in Ohio, too ashamed to stay. James tried to reach me through mutual friends, but they all took my side. Word spread quickly about what happened. People, who used to invite us to dinner parties, stopped calling him. His LinkedIn profile showed he was seeking new opportunities. His reputation was destroyed, and it all happened in less than 48 hours. I went back to Michigan 2 weeks later. Walking into the dorm without Anne felt strange at first, but my new roommate was kind and quiet, and I buried myself in my studies. I finished my master's degree 4 months later with honors. I attended graduation alone, and I was proud of that. I didn't need James there. I didn't need anyone there. I had done this for myself, by myself. When I walked across that stage, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Free. Completely, totally free. People ask me sometimes if I ever spoke to James again. I didn't. He sent one final email 6 months after everything happened. He said he was sorry. He said it was a mistake. He said he'd been confused and stupid and he wanted me back. I read it once and deleted it. There was nothing he could say that would change what I saw in that bedroom. They had both made their choices, and they lived with the consequences. James lost his job, his home, his wife, his reputation. Anne lost her education, her friendships, her self-respect. And me? I lost them. But I gained something more valuable. I gained myself back.